Ken Pelletier is the person who first introduced me to Arthur M. Young over 50 years ago. Arthur has subsequently been a major influence in both of our lives. Keep watching to learn more.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download a free PDF copy of issue number 8 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine or order a beautiful printed copy. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to reflect on a person who's been very important in my life, Arthur M. Young. Many of you who are regular viewers of this series will know that I referred to him often as a person who was instrumental in my development, and I've called him a mentor. And with me today is Dr. Kenneth Pelletier, who actually introduced me to Arthur M. Young back in 1972. Dr. Pelletier is a professor of medicine at the University of California Medical Center in San Francisco. He is the author of many books, including Toward a Science of Consciousness, Longevity, and most recently, Change Your Genes, Change Your Life. Welcome again, Ken.
Good. Thank you. It's good to be here.
We were reflecting earlier on what a seminal time it was back in the 1970s when we were graduate students at Berkeley.
Yes.
And as I recall, there was a group of graduate students who met regularly to explore latest developments related to consciousness. And you brought Arthur M. Young to that group for a series of seminars in Berkeley.
Yes, I actually met Arthur 3 years earlier, around 1969. I was at the University of Pennsylvania in this MD PhD program, and I saw a little brochure about a man who was coming to speak about the convergence between science and mysticism. And I thought, fascinating. If anyone can speak to that, I'm interested. So I went to his lecture. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I thought everything he was saying was nonsense. I just hated everything I was hearing. And what I realized is that everything I was hearing was totally different than anything I had ever been taught and trained to know. That's why I was offended. So he and I were then kind of going back and forth, bantering at the end of his lecture. And he stayed behind with some students. I was outside the lecture hall sitting on the steps, and Arthur came back out, turned around and came over to me and said, "Thank you for your questions. They were very provocative." And I said to him, I said, "I don't know if they were provocative or if they were just antagonistic. I don't know if I should be proud or apologize." And he said, No, I love it. I love the interaction." And he said, and then we started at it again, just going to it. And so he said, "Well, listen, I've got to get home for dinner." Ruth, his wife, Ruth Young, he would never forgive me if I got home late for dinner. He said, "But I have a Saturday morning meeting at my house in Downingtown, in Philadelphia, and I invite some physicists, chemists, astrologers, doctors, you name it. I invite about 7 or 8 people. We have breakfast, and we have a discussion, an open-ended discussion about mysticism and science for that the rest of the morning. Would you like to come?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" And that was the beginning of getting to know Arthur.
Well, one of his characteristics, one that I loved about him, and I hope I emulate myself, is he encouraged people to challenge him. He enjoyed it when people disagreed with him.
He did. And, my takeaway all these years, all these decades later, is he probably had the same impact on you. He taught you how to think. How to think critically, not to accept something because everybody else thought that way or because it was a prevailing scientific dogma, but how to really think your way through what were the underlying assumptions. Is it the local version of reality as opposed to a reality? And how to ask the really telling questions. I mean, he was amazing at doing that. He not only would challenge you, but he was always challenging himself. And in doing so, he gave you a roadmap. How do you ask critical questions about your own belief systems? What do you believe is true, and how do you find out if it is or isn't? It's astounding.
Well, by the time I met him, when you really were arranged to bring him to Berkeley, he had just published I think it was his first book, the Reflexive
Universe. Yes. Well, I left University of Pennsylvania, went back to UC Berkeley, and this led to the group that you're describing. I was moving into an apartment on the north side of Berkeley, and the person moving out was a student of Hal Puthoff's, the very prominent, even at that time, was a very prominent physicist at Stanford Research Institute. And so we began talking, and he said, gee, and I told him, for some reason, I told him about Arthur. I don't even know why. And he said, well, this sounds like he and Hal should meet because Hal's a genius. Sounds like Arthur's a genius. Let's get them together. So I invited Arthur out to SRI. He and Hal Puthoff met. And they were like peas in a pod. I mean, there's just this electricity flowing back and forth between them. I remember Hal at one point said, well, I'm well versed in Scientology. I'm an OT10, which is the operating thetan top of the Scientology scale. And Arthur said, well, yes, I did that about 20 years ago. The kind of gruff voice. And Hal's eyes just lit up. That was it. That for Hal and Arthur, that was the bond, I think, that made their friendship really endure, a kind of appreciation of their mutual training.
And as I recall now, Arthur went through Dianetics even before Scientology.
Correct. It was actually Dianetics with L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah, and he became a Dianetic clear.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what he did. Yeah. So Hal was very impressed by that. And he had this study group, the one that you were just describing, largely people from SRI and Berkeley and the San Francisco Bay Area. And so Arthur then began coming out more often and engaging with this group, and he just got to love it. He thought, well, this is more receptivity, more good thinking than I've had in a long time. So he moved out, and I believe it was probably 1970 or 71, just going back in time, where he bought the Institute.
73.
73, okay.
It was on Benvenue Avenue.
Yes.
And invited me to move in.
Yes, right.
Along with my buddy Saul-Paul Sirag, who's been a guest on this show as well. Yeah.
Oh, these are great. These are wonderful memories. Yeah. But, my memory of him buying the house on Benvenue was that he had a real estate agent taking us around, myself and Joan Schleicher, who still runs now the Antidote Foundation, which was funded from Arthur's estate.
And preserves his work.
Yes, preserves his library, the original writings, the original notebooks, his original charts, his astrological charts, just this huge repository of information. So we were going around looking at various houses, and we came to the Benvenue house, and Arthur looked at it, and Ruth said, well, we could live in the back, and the front would make a great room for a meeting.
Yeah.
And so we were sitting in the front room, and the real estate agent said, well, and she started rattling off however, you could finance the purchase of this. And Arthur, in his very quiet way, said, well, couldn't we just pay cash? and literally, the real estate agent blanched white and sat down. I don't think she'd ever heard those words before. And she said, well, I guess we could do that. And Arthur said, well, fine. Just let me know how much the check is. Yeah. And that was the beginning of the purchase of the Institute for the Study of Consciousness.
Well, we should let our viewers know that Arthur had by that time already invented the Bell helicopter.
Correct.
In fact, that was back in the 1940s.
Correct.
The first commercially licensed helicopter.
Yes, it was at the time before Arthur's called Bell Aircraft. And he went to work for Bell Aircraft, and he had built models of the helicopter. He has a farm, or it had about 100-acre farm in Downingtown, which was about 90 miles west of Philadelphia. And he had a barn, a beautiful barn with downstairs and big glass doors and all of this. And Arthur, he's quite an eccentric character. So he had models had built of the helicopter. And he was talking about how he'd go out in the fields in Pennsylvania and do this vertical takeoff. And there was this farmer watching him, being astounded that if anything could take off vertically like that. And Arthur asked him if he wanted a ride. Would he like to take a ride? The farmer said, yeah, sure, I'll take a ride. So they took off and came down. And Arthur said, well, what'd you think of that? And the farmer said, well, it's okay, but I never put my full weight down. Arthur loved that story. And in his barn, so that was, again, part of this. So when I first met him in Philadelphia, then we would go out to his mainly summer home. And in the barn, he had the original Bell helicopter. I mean, the first one. Model
47.
Model 47. And it's the one that you see now. It's the one with the glass bubble, the traffic helicopter, the rescue helicopters.
I believe that one of them is now in the permanent collection of the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum.
It's actually at the MoMA, which is even more interesting. So Ruth was very involved in the arts. And so the Museum of Modern Art in New York approached Ruth and Arthur about having his original helicopter on display in the MoMA. So now when you walk into the MoMA in the main atrium, if you look over your head, there's a helicopter suspended. That's the original Bell 47 helicopter out of Arthur's barn in Downingtown. So, and he made, huge amount of money, obviously, from the helicopter. It became Bell Helicopter, changed from Bell Aircraft to Bell Helicopter, and Larry Bell and he were good friends. And with the initial money from that was probably 1948. With the original money from that, he and Ruth took 2 years. They made a list of the 50 most prominent people in the world at that time. So they were like Wilhelm Reich, Carl Jung, Einstein, Heisenberg, just the eminent people of his time, and they went and visited them.
I know he met Bertrand Russell.
So he and Ruth just did 2 years. When he came back in 1952, realized that they were all, whether they were psychics, and he met a lot of psychics, a lot of mediums. The Theosophical Society was alive and well, very vibrant in London at the time. So there was this convergence between physics and science and metaphysics and mediumship and all of these odd things. When he came back, he realized they were kind of trying to speak a similar language and point at an underlying reality that united them all. And that's when he founded the Institute for the Study of Consciousness in 1952.
What really impressed me about Arthur is that he set out to invent really a helicopter, not for the sake of the engineering that he was even interested in engineering. It was for him to prove that he was worthy to do philosophy, which was his real interest.
Exactly. That is astounding. That kind of on the way to being a philosopher, he happened to invent the helicopter.
Yeah.
And the specific thing he did was what was called the artificial horizon. So one of the problems with early helicopters was instability.
Mm-hmm.
The rotary blade would get out of kilter and the helicopter would crash. I had a lot of helicopter crashes.
Yeah.
So what Arthur did was realize that you put a small bar basically at a right angle to the main blade,
mm-hmm.
called the artificial horizon. And that established literally an artificial horizon that was stayed constant. So the blade would tilt around this artificial horizon. That's what gave the helicopter its stability. That was the breakthrough.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't, and he had actually gone to the way he discovered the helicopter or thought of inventing it was he went to the patent office.
Back in 1926, as I recall.
Yes. And he wanted to find something that needed inventing.
Mm-hmm.
He literally went in and said, so what needs inventing? And there were things like the television and, there were even wireless telephone things at that time. And he thought the helicopter was kind of fascinating.
I seem to recall he noted that there had been 200 unsuccessful patent applications.
Yes, exactly. He thought, well, he'd be the 200 or you end that losing streak.
And he stuck with it. He spent most of, well over a decade working on designs that just didn't work.
Yes, correct. I mean, he had in this barn in Downingtown, the lower part of the barn was the machine shop.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you've got all these wrecks in there, little models, big models, full scale things. And it just looked like a trash bin, but it was all the failed experiments. And he never considered any experiment to be a failure. It's just that was the next step. So it was a wrong step. Let's try the next step. This is a wrong step. That's a next. Oh, here's a partially right step. Let's take that one. And the other thing that's kind of, it's more personal reflection is that when he made the millions and millions from the helicopter, part of his tour through Europe is he collected Rolls Royces.
Yeah.
So he had in the upstairs of the barn, which is a badminton court, mm-hmm. Where he stored the original Bell 47 was stored in that floor. He had a Rolls Royce limousine that the only other one in the world was owned by the Shah of Iran. So there were just two of them. Then he had another one that was a black limousine, and he had the audacity to cut the back of the limousine off, and he made a pickup truck out of it.
I saw that.
You remember that?
I visited him there,
right.
Yeah.
And he got a nasty letter from Rolls-Royce saying that he had defiled one of their automobiles, and they just this hellfire and brimstone about what he had done. Mm-hmm. So when he founded the Institute for the Study of Consciousness, he actually on the door had inscribed in very beautiful calligraphy foundation for the study of consciousness, because the truck was the foundation for his farm and moving all this stuff around. So he always had this incredible sense of humor, and he held meetings at his home in Downingtown for many, many, many years. And again, would have psychics come in and physicists and astrologers, physicians, and he'd have these little soirees. There'd be about 10 people that he would invite into his home. So that was his East Coast version. Mm-hmm. But he just was so enthralled by the intellectual activity of the people like yourself and Hal and Ed Mitchell from the Noetic Sciences that he met on the West Coast. He decided to migrate, to move.
Well, the 1970s was a very seminal period for me personally, but I think for the field of parapsychology as well. It seemed like the whole world was going to change back then because of the consciousness research that was being done. The world didn't change then, but it's moving along.
Oh, yes.
And Arthur was instrumental in funding important studies back then.
He was. One of the other people that I connected Arthur to was to Ed Mitchell. Mm-hmm. And this was right after his return from his flights around the moon.
Yeah.
And they got along famously. They were just like, again, it was like he and Hal Puthoff. Mm-hmm. They were just famous friends. And a mutual friend of theirs was Andrzej Puharich, the physician who had studied psychics and mediums, and actually had studied the Israeli psychic Uri Geller, and had had brought him over to New York and did some work at Andrea's house in New York. So Arthur decided he would fund bringing Uri Geller to the Stanford Research Institute, so that scientists here could see, could they debunk this supposed psychic who could, bend metal at a distance and do psychic phenomena. And so I remember in the car, it was Arthur, myself, I was driving. So I was driving, Arthur, Andrea Puharich, and picking up Uri Geller at SFO. I mean, that was the electricity in the car was just enough to almost levitate it. We were almost just giddy about this time. And one of the things we did is we brought Uri to the SRI, and they had a vacuum chamber with, I believe it was titanium suspended between two posts. Now, titanium can't bend. It can only break because of the nature of it as a substance. So they had a titanium bar suspended between these two posts inside an electromagnetically shielded, vacuumed container. And and there was probably 50 predominantly physicists sitting all around it, and they basically challenged Uri Geller to make a difference, bend this, break it, do something. And it probably took him, he was really concentrating in the way that when you see him do this, you know that he's in the groove. And all of a sudden, this piece of titanium just bent. And it was audible. The gasp in the room was audible. When they examined under electron microscope this bent piece of titanium, which should not happen, that's a physical impossibility, what they found is that rather than it actually bending, it turned out the molecules, or the electrons, had migrated away from the point of the bend into the other part of the piece of metal. So it's like he hadn't really bent it as much as moved molecules, almost like he melted it. And that was one of those astounding episodes. So again, you're right, this sense of awe that things were really going to change, that this is going to make, and it's made a difference. Many of the people we're talking about are still around, still alive, still working, still having a great impact. But the sheer, it's like the Renaissance, the interaction among these people that were really brought together by Arthur, and the activity around him was astounding.
Well, it was in this time frame that you wrote, I think it was your first book, Mind is Healer, Mind is Slayer?
Yes. Yes.
I assume Arthur had some influence there.
He did, because Arthur introduced me to meditation. So we would do these, is predominant, well, we did it in Berkeley too, but we'd meet on a Saturday morning, and it'd be some subject matter that he would choose, like biology or chemistry or physics, some kind of bone-breaking subject that would, and he'd say, we're going to study this morning. So we'd meet in the morning, have a little bit of, coffee, and then we'd have this lesson. No, the only way to describe it, of his kind of, this is what conventional chemistry says, here's what I think is really the case. And he was building his model, the V-shaped model of the universe, basically. And he was thinking through parts of it, and I got a chance to think through the parts of it with him. And then we would either start the day and or end the day with a meditation. And I didn't know what meditation was. I had no idea. And it was wonderful. And so in the course of that, I then at UC Berkeley, they had an undergraduate course in Tibetan Buddhism. In basically Zazen Buddhism. And I thought, this is an easy course. I'll take it for a year. And so I did. And that got me hooked on meditation. So part of the Buddhist philosophy is the mind is the slayer of the real. But only the slayer can slay the slayer. So Mind is Slayer was always there, describing meditation. And at the time, I also had been working with Jack and other meditators with this self-inflicted wounds. So I began just writing these things down, thinking about them out loud. And suddenly one morning I woke up and Mind is Healer was there. So Mind is Healer, Mind is Slayer was there as a book title. And it really grew out of the meditation practice that Arthur engendered. Arthur paid for some of the research with Jack Schwartz and the others. So again, he was instrumental in doing that.
And I think it's fair to say that the whole field that is now known as integrative health kind of emerged from the work you did.
Well, thank you. That's kind of you. I hope it had an influence.
Well, and I've certainly read other people crediting you. It's not just my opinion.
Okay. I've heard that as well. It's almost overwhelming to think of. I mean, I'm humbled by that because that wasn't, it wasn't my intent, but it was mind-boggling. It was really quite dazzling. This was the first time that unequivocally we demonstrated that, your mind had regulation over your bodily functions. Mind-body became real. Yeah. And this is one of those sidebar stories, but after I did the early demonstration project with Jack, there was a writer from Playboy magazine who got wind of it. I don't even know how. They came out and did this interview. Now, I never realized how many people in prison and the military read Playboy magazine. So I got inundated with letters, no internet at the time, letters saying, well, I can do that, or I've done that, blah, 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 blah. So then we lined up a whole series, largely of criminals, who had developed these extraordinary abilities. Yep. So
they have a motivation.
Well, one of them was a drug smuggler who was in prison on San Quentin. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, I can do that because I've been shot and stabbed, and in order not to cry out and be discovered and arrested, I had to control my bleeding, I had to control my pain, I had to control infection because I couldn't go to a doctor. Yeah. So we brought him in, and he did his demonstration, and his particular trick was to take bicycle spokes, sharpened bicycle spokes, put them through the cheeks of his face. So in one side, through his mouth, and out the other. And the photograph we ended up publishing with the study was him with his mouth open, obviously in a trance. You can see his eyes roll back, with the bicycle spokes crossing inside of his mouth, and he looked like a cat with 6 steel whiskers.
My God.
So again, it was just this time of like a spark, like something was going on here that we didn't understand, and people really galvanized around that, like around Uri Geller, around Ed Mitchell. Russell Targ was Hal's kind of partner at the time. SRI was a real hotbed of this kind of work, and it was, and I still remains a special time. So, I think by virtue of us being part of that, I think we're both fortunate. I think the universe gives you a wink and a nod, and sometimes you just show up at the right place.
Well, the Institute for the Study of Consciousness was featured in a book you may know by David Kaiser called How the Hippies Saved Physics. And many of the people involved in that particular movement to look at the role of what we now call entanglement in physics and how it might be related to consciousness really came out of that circle that Arthur had brought around him.
Yes, I remember that with Fritjof Capra, had written the Tao of Physics at about that time, and he became part of the Institute constellation. Rupert Sheldrake was part of that group as well. And again, these are people who have had this enormous impact, and we still, to this day, have not realized the full wisdom and insight that they've brought forward. String theory and entanglement theory has grown directly out of that hotbed of thinking in the 70s, which really overturned Newtonian physics and really began to realize that with quantum physics was a whole new practical level of impact that the theories had and the people had.
One of for benefit of our viewers, I might say a few things that Arthur contributed. He had this notion that you could take an idea like the periodic table of elements and apply it to everything.
Yes, he did. And probably his greatest contribution was what he called the grid. And it was a V-shaped arc. And he, I think, way ahead of his time, or consistent with sages for thousands of years in all the great religions and philosophies, is that consciousness was superordinate to matter. and the V marked the descent of consciousness into physical matter, and then how consciousness would turn at the base and begin to operate, to experience, to grow in its breadth and grow in its wisdom through stages of growth like a plant, through motion as an animal, and so on, up to the point of enlightenment and transcendence. And it was a 7x7 matrix, and it was, in fact, fashioned after the periodic table, as though it's a periodic table of consciousness.
And we talked in our earlier discussion about epigenetics, how that the turning point itself is right where the DNA molecule is. And Arthur had some significant scientific insights into the nature of DNA that really were way ahead of his time.
Oh, far ahead of his time. I think we haven't even really... If they get rediscovered in the next decade, I'll be astounded. But at the turn, he predicted at least two qualities of the DNA, which we now know to be accurate. And this is, we need to know in like the last 6 months is when these articles have come out. So one is that the DNA is a superconductor at room temperature, which is unheard of. There's no other substance, no other life form, no other molecule in the universe that is a superconductor at room temperature. At ambient temperature, superconductors do not exist. He predicted that it did, and there is theory now by some physicists at Princeton, which is Arthur's alma mater, that in fact the DNA core is a superconductor at ambient temperature. That's astounding. The second is that he believed that light, the photon, was the basic unit of communication, of physicality, if you will. Light's not really physical, but the physicality of the universe was manifest in light. We know that the DNA emits light. So if you take these two properties, a superconductor core that emits light, those are both outside of space, outside of time. And Arthur basically theorized that this was de facto evidence of the influence of consciousness, something that is not in the material world, not limited by three-dimensional reality, that had a transcendence in space and a transcendence in time, and it was represented in the DNA structure at the base of this V, which then led to the evolution of life as we know it. Now, this is 50, maybe 60 years ago that he had this insight. That's staggering. That's absolutely astounding.
And I know Arthur was criticized by Ken Wilber, the philosopher, for his emphasis on the photon, as if Arthur was trying to make the photon some sort of mechanical basis of consciousness. That's not really where he was coming from at all.
No, not at all. His point about the photon is that, just as we said, which is it's outside of space, it's outside of time, and that it has no form. It's timeless, it's formless, it's outside of what we know as three-dimensional reality. So he saw it as a representation of spirit, that the photon, if you will, is a basic unit of analysis. And if you think about the way that mediums describe entities that they talk with, these entities are often described as a point of light. They're not described as entities as you and I sitting here. They're described as points of light that convey information. So it's not far off. And again, way ahead of its time. Arthur would never be reductionistic in terms. The other is that the other property of the photon is you cannot locate its position in space and time. You can locate its position, but then the time is off. You could locate it in time, but you couldn't. It's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. And that for Arthur was, again, an indication that there's something inherently elusive about the physical universe, which requires something more encompassing, more superordinate, like consciousness, in order to complete our understanding.
And of course, we also know that from Einstein, if you're traveling at the speed of light along with a photon, time stops completely.
Correct. Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
To me, that's an amazing finding.
I would totally agree.
It may take me several more lifetimes just to digest the implications of it.
That's how I feel about Arthur's work. Is the more I learn, the less I know. But the more I appreciate the elegance of Arthur's thinking, the clarity of it. I mean, he would write in these large 12 by 20 notebooks, and I think he has hundreds of volumes of this information. He would just write every day. Would be writing, physics or chemistry or astrology or psychic phenomena. I mean, he investigated psychic phenomena in a very rigorous way. Mm-hmm. And got to know some very exciting people from the Theosophical Society, from Joan Grant, who's the famous British medium who wrote that whole series of books like My Life as Corolla.
Far Memory.
Yes. Far Memory actually was a real influence.
They're wonderful novels. I mean, they read like novels. According to Joan Grant, they are her past life memories, but they're beautifully written and very emotionally powerful.
Very powerful. One of the things that, again, this is kind of personal reminiscences, but one of the things, since Arthur knew I was going into this area of mind-body medicine, he wanted me to basically be exposed to Joan and her husband Kay, Dennis Kelsey,
who was a psychiatrist.
He was a member of the Royal Society and a British psychiatrist. And so I went to Arcachon. They had a house in the west of France, and went to their home and stayed with them for a period of time to kind of learn and all these wonderful things. And what was always mind-boggling about it was that I'd be kind of sleeping, and Joan would come in the morning and sit down on the side of the bed and go, "Now, that dream you had last night where you're walking down the path and you went down the right side of the road. Bad move. You should have gone down the left."
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was phenomenal. I should say, so tonight, when you repeat that dream, you remember to turn left at the fork in the road and you'll have a different experience.
My goodness.
So she was just, phenomenal, uncanny. Really quite an amazing woman. And in Far Memory is the book where Dennis would write as a psychiatrist, looking at a patient and the Western medical diagnostic and explanatory model. Joan would then write a chapter about what it was for her as a medium and psychic to see that same person. And they went back and forth with the book. And that was still is a phenomenal book, which gives you a view of one reality and the other, but where's the overlap and how significant is it to have both perspectives? So they were very influential on me and a lot of other people. And again, through Arthur's, connection to
pioneering really a new model for psychotherapy.
Yes, it is. And to this day, his work is still very viable. One of the women I knew in Philadelphia was a woman named Joan Schleicher, who was at Bryn Mawr studying for her master's degree in art history. And I was telling her one day about this crazy man, Arthur, and his wife, Ruth. And Joan got intrigued and said, "Well, could I come to one of these?" And I said, "Well, I'll ask Arthur." And Arthur, "Yeah, of course, bring her, attractive blonde. Arthur loved women." So he said, "Yeah, bring her." So she did, and she still now is still the president of the Antidotes Foundation, which is the repository of the videotapes, books, manuscripts, etc., and the remains of the debris, if you will, from Downingtown in Cambria, California. So she probably is the person that knows the most about the theory and the most about Arthur and his legacy, and has worked very hard to preserve that.
And it was instrumental in publishing his astrological autobiography, Nested Time.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And that was his great love. I mean, Arthur was a masterful astrologer. Really masterful.
He enjoyed finding ideas and concepts that other people couldn't accept, that they couldn't tolerate, that were outrageous. So he was very interested in UFO contactees way before they became popular.
Yes, he was.
He was interested in radionics and radiesthesia.
Yep. Yes. And yes, right. His mind, his intellect was undaunted, again, by conventional reality. It's like whatever what did he call it? local customs.
Mm-hmm.
He was undaunted by the local customs of belief systems. What did you believe about material reality? What did you believe about the stars? Did they influence you or not? What did you believe about mediumship, survival after death? It didn't matter to him. He wanted to find out for himself. He wanted to make up his own mind. He wanted to do the kind of exploration that was unbridled. He didn't need, he didn't have a position to defend in a university. He didn't need someone's money to support him. He was a free mind with an incredible intellect to explore anything and everything. And that was an astounding experience to just be around him.
I know he once told me that if he could start all over again, he'd try to invent UFOs.
No, I didn't know that. That's a great story.
And on another occasion, he was speculating. He said, I really wonder in other civilizations, on other planets, how does their astrology work?
Yeah, I've heard him speculate about that.
Yeah.
I've heard him speculate about that. And, the other part of it was, there was this incredible intellect, but always with a sense of humor. You never felt like you were in the presence of genius. If you took a step back and realized what he was saying and what you were listening to, you realized this man is a bona fide genius. But he always did it with this disarming humor. Yeah. And to me, he was such a passionate person. I mean, he physically loved to touch and hug and laugh and play. And he always would have the best suits tailored at Savile Row. I mean, he was very much a man of the earth and of happiness. Yeah. I remember one time we were at Downingtown and we were in his living room and his chair was here and I was here and the door that opened to the outside hallway was open basically, and Ruth came in, and Ruth developed the Peace Academy, which was basically
World Peace Academy,
to basically get diplomats and people with knowledge together to resolve issues they could not resolve as formally representing their countries where they needed input. Yeah. So she had been in a meeting in the house. There were two townhouses. One was their personal house. The other was a townhouse on Delancey Street. That was the Peace Academy. Anyway, Ruth had been in meetings in Philadelphia, kind of exhausting meetings, and she was all disheveled, and she kind of walked in, and Arthur said, "Oh, how was your day?" And she said, "Oh, it was a hard one." And he went like that. He said, "Come here." And she kind of went over to him, and he grabbed her and just wrestled her down to the chair. They were kissing and hugging, and I'm going, "Shoot, I don't know if I should be watching this." But that was Arthur, this passion about life and people, and he and Ruth loved each other, dearly. I mean, they were always an amazing model of how to really make a relationship work. So
I know when I visited him at Downingtown on one occasion, he was out chopping wood. He loved to do physical activity like that.
Yes, he did. He did. Yeah, a very, quite amazing.
I remember when he died.
Yes.
1995.
Yep.
I was close to him in those years, and something quite extraordinary happened that day, as I recall. It was even printed in the newspaper. There was a double halo around the sun.
Oh, how interesting. I did not realize that.
There was a double halo around the sun the day Arthur died, and it just made me think that, he was like, his spirit was so big it was illuminating the sky.
Wow, that's great. That's really interesting. I remember, right. I remember Walter Pankey was a physician friend and close to Arthur and Ruth. Yeah. And Walter died in a scuba diving accident. And the announcement came, and Arthur was sitting there, and he got this letter telling him that, and he got very, very quiet. And I said, "Arthur, are you, feeling sad? I can leave the room if you're feeling sad." And he said, "Yes, but I'm wondering what I'm doing wrong. Why am I still here?" So he saw it. Walter had graduated in his conception. Walter had finished his job, worked through his karma on the earth plane, and now is in a different place. But I thought, now there's an unusual reaction to hearing about death.
Because I a couple of times I tried to talk to Arthur about death.
Right.
he didn't want to discuss it at all. It was like there was a block. He was not interested. He wanted to live. I know that. He loved life, and even towards the very end, when he was ill, he was seeking all sorts of exotic alternative remedies.
Yes.
Obviously, they didn't help, but he lived a long life. He died, I think, at the age of 90.
Yeah, I think it was actually 92 or 93. He made it kind of over the 90 mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite an extraordinary life.
Mm-hmm. Well, he obviously touched you and me, and I think everyone else who knew him deeply.
Yes, he's had a lot of influence. You find other people's writings. Mm-hmm. Now, I know Hal Puthoff still credits Arthur with a lot of influences on his work. Certainly, he had an influence on Ed Mitchell and the founding of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is obviously still intact and going strong. Mm-hmm. So he, from that early time, has continued to have a profound influence, in his books are, The Reflexive Universe is one of his books. I met a kind of small world phenomenon. I was in London, and I'm on the board of a company, and they were meeting with a potential VC backer for the company. And I don't even know how we got on the subject, but somehow this straight-laced billionaire London VC investor knew about Arthur and was totally enamored of the fact that I actually knew him and what was he like and what was it. And so when he and his wife and his children came to Carmel in Monterey, we had this day-long kind of like this kind of a conversation. He wanted to know everything about Arthur, and he had changed. He dropped all of his VC work. He'd made enough money to last for the rest of his life, but he dropped all of his VC work because he wanted to dedicate his life to learning more detail of Arthur's work and finding out how he can propagate this going forward. This was just within the last year. So you never know where these seeds and these influences are going to show up.
Well, I think it's a worthy endeavor. And I know, probably very few people think about Arthur M. Young these days.
Right.
Arthur Young, the accountant, is probably more famous than Arthur M. Young, the philosopher. But I hope people dig into his work. The Reflexive Universe is a classic.
Yes, it is.
It's an incredibly profound book.
It is. It absolutely is. Yes.
And The Geometry of Meaning is another very profound book.
Yes, it is.
And I might mention also when I moved into the Institute, my housemate in those days was Saul-Paul Sirag. We were the only two people invited to move in. He had an incredible influence on Saul-Paul.
Yes, he did.
In those days, when we first moved in, Saul-Paul was a science writer. He was writing a column called The New Alchemy that appeared in college newspapers around the country. And Arthur provoked him to really dig into physics and mathematics. And just about 2-3 years ago, Saul-Paul published his first book.
Yes.
It's called Adex Theory. It's sort of a very abstract name, but it's a book that unifies mathematics and physics.
Oh, interesting.
The unification of mathematics and physics, a very profound, important book, and Arthur is the one who got him started on that path.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Very fascinating. Yeah. I'll have to add that to my reading list.
It's very dense. You really have to be have an advanced knowledge of mathematics to appreciate it. I struggle with it.
I'm sure. Yeah, it sounds like one of those books that's a challenge. Arthur would appreciate that. Very much.
But it was Arthur who told him to look into the Eddington-Einstein view of the universe. That's where it started.
Wow, fascinating. Fascinating. Wow. Yeah, a lot of good times.
Well, Ken, what a wonderful, heartfelt discussion.
Same for me. Yeah, this is great going back. A lot of good memories, good people, and a very special time for both of us. And it continues to this day.
It continues, yeah. His influences, I feel his presence.
Oh, yeah, I do too as well. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Ken.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun. It was very personal and very heartfelt. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download a free PDF copy of issue number 8 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine or order a beautiful printed copy. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.